Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. The war in the Middle East resumes, putting an end to a 2-month ceasefire that with Israel launching a deadly wave of airstrikes and expanding a ground offensive in Gaza this week after failing to reach an agreement over the second phase of a deal.
Hamas refused offer after offer to release our hostages. In the past 2 weeks, Israel did not initiate any military action in the hope that Hamas would change course. Well, that didn't happen. While Israel accepted the offer of President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, Hamas flatly refused to do so.
For more now on the resumption of the war, Cliff May, founder and president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Cliff, welcome. So what is Israel trying to accomplish here by resuming the campaign against Hamas?
I think what Israel is trying to do is militarily incapacitate Hamas and also make it impossible for Hamas to politically continue to control Gaza, which it has kind of been doing. You know, once there was a ceasefire, Hamas put their uniforms back on. They paraded, of course, when they would bring out the hostages, they would do it in a very showy way in order to humiliate the Israelis, humiliate the hostages. They've been making money because they take the aid and they either use it or they resell it. I think Israel is going to try to make all that impossible for them. And the Israelis don't believe there's any way to sit around and wait and hope the hostages will be released. They've given up on that.
But that's a big issue in Israel, Cliff. I mean, the Israeli public hasn't given up on the hostages. And, from Hamas's point of view, they understand that the hostages are their main point of leverage once they give them up. What's the restraint? This is from Hamas thinking. What's the restraint on Netanyahu and the Israelis coming in and really wiping them out?
Look, the Israelis are divided on this. The Israelis often are divided. I think Hamas hoped that because there were a lot of Israelis saying, let's get out every hostage, even if that means we have to pull out every troop, even from, say, the Philadelphia corridor, which is the main route through which weapons had been coming in to resupply. I think the view in Hamas was maybe the Israelis will have to hold back on this. At the end of the day, Netanyahu, the prime minister, has to make a decision. He did so, and the decision is, and I think it's supported by President Trump as well, that at this point we have to go in and we have to do serious damage to Hamas as a military power and as a political power. And I think that's what they've done. And yes, there's in a democratic society, there's often division. In Israel, there's always division. And but they've gone ahead and made a decision, and that's what they're going to do, I think, for a while. And I think we're also seeing the very real possibility. The Israelis are saying, if you continue to hold these hostages or kill these, do what you are doing, we are going to make a larger buffer zone between Gaza and Israel. In other words, you're going to lose some of the land you have been controlling. It's going to be harder to live in Gaza afterwards.
From the Israeli point of view, how much difference does it make that we have now moved in the United States from Biden to Trump? Does that give, in the Israeli government's mind, a lot more running room because Hamas was trying to make a great deal, and did for a while, of the differences between Biden and Israel?
I think that's right. I think that's for sure. Two things. One is that the U.S. has, under Trump, has been resupplying on a very prompt level munitions that are necessary for the kind of offensive that the Israelis are waging against Hamas right now. Second, you have heard President Trump say, if the hostages are not released, including an American hostage, and I think he's very frustrated that he hasn't gotten any cooperation from Qatar, which pretends to or says it's an intermediary here, over that. He said all hell is going to break loose. My guess is he said to Netanyahu, I said all hell is going to break loose. You've got to break it loose, you understand. I'm not going to do it, you're going to do it. And I think that was part of it. It's also not just coincidental that right now President Trump is going after the Houthis in Yemen in a way that President Biden didn't. President Biden tended to use deterrence by denial. In other words, he would shoot the arrows much more than the archers. Now what you're seeing is a very different approach where President Trump is going after Houthi leadership very directly and may at some point go to Iran as well, because the missiles and drones that the Houthis have been using, 175 times or so against naval ships, 145 I think or so against commercial ships, those are coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And those factories could be rubbled, and the routes by which they get into Yemen, either sea or through Oman, theoretically a good friend of ours, that could be stopped either through diplomacy or through military action.
But, Cliff, it seems to me that more escalation here is inevitable. I mean, the Houthis, after the U.S. strikes on the Houthis in Yemen, the Houthis fired more missiles, or said they did, at American ships, although they were intercepted. And they continued to fire ships daily, missiles rather, daily at Israel. Now, those again were intercepted. But if they're going to continue to do that, aren't you going to have to escalate the campaign against the Houthis and ultimately go after their supplier in Iran? Isn't that the logic of the president's language?
I think it is the logic, and I think it is what has to be done. Deterrence by denial, knocking out these missiles and drones with very expensive interceptors, that it's never going to stop them. They can be stopped, well, if you kill them. They can be stopped if the weapons supply is cut off. And if the Islamic Republic of Iran, who now denies that they're giving them the weapons, we know they are, if they continue to supply those weapons, again, those factories can be hit. Right now, Iran has very little in the way of air defenses. The Israelis knocked that out some time ago. That also creates a window, maybe 6 months worth, when the U.S. and I think Israel will consider, if we can't get the Islamic Republic of Iran to verifiably end their nuclear weapons development program, should we do that militarily? Should the U.S. do it, or should Israel do it, or in some cooperation? But yes, this is now a different kind of a war than we had in the Biden administration.
All right. Cliff May, thanks for that insight.